This year, thanks to grassroots action calling the bill sponsor, we got the public smoking removed from the bill before it passed the House. So if anyone in this room called, thank you. It really did make a difference. As you probably heard, the legalization bills. So we introduced a package of bills. It was identical in each chamber. One bill would have set up the tax structure. It would have been an excise tax, and it would have distributed that money, half of it to community schools. And I'm going to pretend I did this on purpose. The amount of money that was raised would have exactly funded a community schools coordinator in every eligible school in Maryland. And that is the schools where at least half the students are receiving free or reduced price lunch. And that would help give back some of these revenues to the communities that have been hardest hit by prohibition and the over-policing that comes with it. It would have also given $37 million a year to addiction treatment, which is, I don't know if you heard, something our state needs more of. The governor's plan is $10 million a year for 5 years. That's great. Ours would have been $37 million a year indefinitely with the estimated revenue in Maryland. In addition, there was the companion legislation would have legalized possession of up to, now I'm going to forget, I believe it was 2 ounces, home cultivation of up to 6 plants, 3 of which can be mature, which is consistent with the sort of low end of what other states have done on this. And what this would have done is ensure that small businesses, people that aren't, the big companies and the big groups with the investors and lobbyists, would have an opportunity to participate in the industry. So it would have capped the number of plants or the canopy area by regulation of how much they could cultivate. They wouldn't have had to do the tax paying and the lab testing. They would have sold it to other businesses, other growers or processors, to continue to move it through the system and give more people an opportunity to participate. We had a great press conference. We had some great hearings. A lot of folks came out, and we had some really good conversations with legislators and got some additional bill sponsors this year. It did not move forward this year, in part because of the medical stuff, which I'm going to get to next. There was also legislation introduced to put this on the ballot. That didn't move this past year, in part because it wouldn't be on the ballot until 2018 anyway. But that is definitely something that could potentially come up again. So there was a lot of ideas that were put forth by legislators to address the lack of diversity in the industry and some of the other issues that came up. And I'm not going to go through every bill because we would be here all night. But just to kind of, in broad strokes, there was a couple bills that would have given the 2 people who were bumped in the name of geographic diversity the last minute, that would have just given them their licenses. They were originally in the top 15. There was bills that would just add more licenses, presumably in the hopes that that would increase the diversity or just get more people into the industry. There were bills that would have totally wiped out the entire scoring process, started over, scored in a different way, and then given I believe it was a 10% bump to African-American owned businesses. There were a number of bills that would have disbanded the existing commission. So there was a lot of different proposals floating around out there in Annapolis. And there was actually a work group set up on the House side with different delegates who were interested to try to put together sort of a compromise based on all these different pieces of legislation. That was led by Delegate Rosenberg. There was the Attorney General got involved because some of the proposals, unfortunately, may not have passed constitutional muster. For those of you who don't know, anytime the government considers race in any way, even if it's supposed to be helping people, they're subject to what we lawyers call strict scrutiny, which basically means the Supreme Court makes it very hard. And then there would have been 5 additional licenses that would have been given out after the disparity study was done, presumably with some looking at what that study said, with some increase to try to achieve diversity in giving out those additional licenses. There was also a fund that would have been set up with fees from the businesses that would have helped poor patients try to pay for their medical cannabis. So I'm sure you know it's not covered by insurance, so some patients who aren't working have difficulty. So there's a number of provisions in there. And here's where it gets really interesting. So they had a compromise bill. It was passed in the Senate. There was a bunch of applause. Everybody thought it passed. It came back over to the House for the final vote. And someone took a knee, like at a football game, and they ran out the clock. So the final vote to pass the legislation occurred 2 minutes after midnight, which means it doesn't count because the session ends at midnight on the final day. So that's what happened. Since then, there has been a call for a special session to be held to pass the legislation. The good news in what's happened since then is that Governor Hogan has ordered a disparity study on his own. So he didn't wait for the legislation. He said, we're just going to do this. We're going to have this information. And you know what? We can use that disparity study when we hand out licenses next year when we legalize for adults. We are already working on drafting and getting our allies together for next year. If they put a constitutional, if the legislature decides they want to see this on the ballot, they can put a constitutional amendment on the ballot. That would be in the general election in 2018. And they could also do what we call contingent legislation, which is basically legislation where they've figured everything out and it just doesn't take effect until the voters say, yep. That is exactly what they did for casinos, if you guys remember that, back in, I think it was 2012. So that's one possibility. They could also just pass a piece of legislation. But either way, we are very excited about looking forward to next year.